Thank you all for being here. My name is Blake Thomas. I am the manager of our postdoctoral scholars program. We're going to cover two different topics this morning. The first was one that Virginia did not have a chance to get to in her presentation last month, which is elevator speeches, writing a short, brief presentation about your research for people who are not necessarily familiar with your subject matter area. And we're also going to talk about searching for grants through Pivot and Grant Forward, which are two of the databases that Baylor subscribes to. The majority of this presentation is going to be me sharing my screen with a browser window up, showing you how to use the two search tools. So I do have a few PowerPoint slides, but for the most part, everything that we do is just going to be me talking through the browser and showing you how to use those tools. If you have questions while we're in the middle of the presentation, you are welcome to, if you're here in person, Javier, you're welcome to just raise your hand. Those of you who are on Zoom, you can use the chat feature. Andy, who is our graduate student videographer, is right over here. He's got Zoom going. He'll be paying attention to the chat and checking to see if we have any questions there. But other than that, let's go ahead and get started. Before I do that, though, I wanted to check and see, is there anyone on this call who, since we have these two topics to cover and they are not really the same as one another, is there anybody on the call or here in person, Javier, who was really, really wanting to talk about elevator speeches to the exclusion of everything else? You wouldn't have come if we had not been talking about elevator speeches. Anybody feel very, very strongly about those elevator speeches? All right, hearing none. Thanks, Denise. I think we will cover that part a little bit more quickly then to save some time to go through the grant searching tools. I sort of had the sense that that might be what more folks were interested in. That's what I've gotten more feedback about. So we will quickly cover the end of the elevator speeches part from Virginia's presentation last month. All right. So an elevator speech is meant to explain to someone who is not an expert in your area very quickly what you do and why it's important. I think the reason that some people struggle with this is that it's easy as a scientist to get very, very specific in your research aims. In fact, that's what you do. That's part of your job, is to have a very small niche that is your area where you might know more about that than almost anybody else in the world. But it's a very, very small area of the subject. When you're talking to someone who is maybe not an expert in your very small area, or even an expert in your discipline as a whole, you need to be able to explain your research to them in a way that's going to make sense and that's going to land with them so that they will understand the impact. So before I came to work at Baylor, I was working for a wireless company, actually a paging company, which, believe it or not, still exists. And one of the things that I did, I was in a marketing role there. And so I helped salespeople to write sales presentations or respond to requests for proposal from hospitals, government entities, large businesses. And they would write these presentations about the products that we sell and the services that we have. And they'd feel very strongly that this presentation is going to win me the business. And I would read their proposals. And a lot of the times I would go back to them and I would say, okay, I read your proposal. What I don't understand is why do they need this product? Why does the customer need our services or our products? And they would a lot of times give me kind of a blank look, and then they would say, well, they don't have one. And that's not necessarily a great reason for presuming that a customer needs to buy something. But I came to work at Baylor, and the first job that I had here was helping folks with their proposals for internal grants and a few for external grants as well. But I would read proposals that explained from, for example, a chemist's perspective, why they needed to study this one specific compound and why they felt like studying that compound was important. And they would say, well, and I would go back to them and I would ask them the question, well, why is it important to study this? You know, I've gathered that you are telling me that it is, but why is that important? And they would say something like, occasionally, they would say something like, well, no one's ever studied it before, which might be a good reason for you to be doing it, might not, but that's not the most persuasive way to present your research, especially to someone who might not be familiar and might not understand the implications of the very small area in which you are an expert. And so that's why we suggest this sort of 4-point approach to crafting a good elevator speech, a frame to begin your presentation. Why should I care? And this is something that requires a little bit of thought on your part. This can also be, it can also really help when you write this part to talk with someone who is not familiar with your field. Maybe a fellow postdoc who you meet at one of the events, maybe a colleague, or maybe one of your friends from undergraduate who went off in a different direction. But have a conversation with someone who's not necessarily an expert in your field and explain to them the broad implications of your research, why that research is important in a broad way, and then see if they can articulate back to you what is important about your research in a way that reflects kind of what you were trying to convey to them. A lot of the time, as I said, I think as academics, we make assumptions that other people are going to understand why studying this particular compound or this particular intervention or this particular whatever. We assume that people are going to have the background knowledge and the context to understand why that's important, but they may not. And so it can be helpful to frame the conversation in a way that gives a frame of reference to the listener so they have some basis for at least a foothold for understanding. Next, we suggest that you convey some known information, some background. So you might say, you might frame the problem by saying, for example, if you study, I hate to always reach for this, but if you study cancer, you might say, we know that cancer is a particularly difficult problem to solve. Obviously, it impacts a lot of people, and there's this particular type of cancer that's very difficult to treat. You might then go into your known information and give just a little bit of background about what we already know. What is known at this point? Well, we know that these cells behave in this way in this environment. We know that these cells tend to behave this way. They tend to grow in this manner. And based on that information, we suspect that these other things might be the case about this particular type of cancer. So frame what we know about the subject already, and then move to the critical need. What do we need to know? And that is, what's the gap in knowledge? What's the thing that would be so great if we could just figure it out, but we need to know something else before we can get there. And this is the place that if you can explain it well, and if you can do it in clear, simple terms in a logical sequence, this is a place where you can really grab interest from a person who's not even an expert. If you can do a good job of framing the background of the problem and the critical need, why that need is so important, and that might be that, we can't go forward with our research in this direction until we understand this piece. Here's why this piece is the linchpin to understanding the rest of what we need to know about this subject. If you've done a good job with framing and presenting the known background information, then that critical need can really be a great way to get attention and get buy-in from your audience. And then finally, the impact. What's your goal? What do you think we could do if we knew that, if we solve that critical need? So if we knew this linchpin, what else do you think that might enable us to figure out that we don't already know? So we know it's critical to an area of inquiry that we're interested in, but what else might we be able to do? How else might this help with other research, or how might this just have an impact in the world? So those are kind of the four elements that we suggest. So an example, you might frame it from a professor's work, who I'm actually not familiar with, but you probably know the HPV virus can lead to cervical cancer. That's the frame. Known information, you may not know that most sexually active people will get the virus, that it's a much greater problem in the developing world than in the US, and then a critical need. My research seeks to develop better methods of educating families about the HPV vaccine so they'll choose vaccination for their children. The impact then is that if we can develop an effective public health education strategy, more people will be protected. In fact, widespread vaccination worldwide could reduce cervical cancer deaths by 2/3. So you're framing with something that they understand, you're presenting the critical need that you're trying to approach, you're showing why it has an impact. So we had, I think, initially planned in Virginia's initial presentation, she was going to ask you to spend a few minutes writing an elevator speech on your current project. I think given that there is more interest in grant searching than there is in the elevator speech, I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you for later, but I think that it can be, that's something that can be helpful and something that you're going to want to do and talk about with someone who is not an expert in your field. Run those things by them and get their input as well. Andy, I think there's a
broader impact versus intellectual merit.
I'm sorry?
She's wondering broader impact versus intellectual merit.
Broader impact versus intellectual merit. I think, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that question. I think you want to include both of those elements in your elevator speech. I think the broader impact comes in the critical need and impact area. The intellectual merit is more in the known information and the critical need part, explaining why. You can explain the intellectual merit of your project in terms of, here's what we already know, but here's this critical piece that we don't know yet. And this is how I am proposing to fill that critical need, that gap in knowledge. And so that is where you can explain the intellectual merit of your proposal. So for National Science Foundation, those are your two review criteria. And so those are evaluated very closely, as you need to have both of those. So I think you can explain them both in the elevator speech. I think you need to do both. And if I'm not answering the question that you intended to ask, then feel free to elaborate and clarify, and we'll talk more about it. Cool. All right. Okay, well then with that, let's move to the next part of our presentation, using Pivot and Grant Forward to find research funding. This is something that, as I said, when I first came to Baylor, I did a lot of this. I did this presentation quite a bit. Pivot was the only database that we had back then. We had maybe one other that nobody really used and we don't have anymore. But now we have two. And so our learning objectives here are to show you how to register for Pivot, navigate the homepage, search for funding using quick search, advanced search, track opportunities, share them, claim your profile, search for profiles, basically all the different functions that you might want to use on Pivot. On Grant Forward, our objectives are show you how to register, navigate the homepage, search using the quick and advanced searches, save searches and create alerts, and claim and search your profiles on Grant Forward. So very similar objectives for the two. As we get into this, you'll probably notice that I'm spending a little bit more time on Pivot than I am on Grant Forward. The reason for that, if I'm being honest, is a couple. First, I'm more familiar with Pivot than I am with Grant Forward. It's the one that I started using when I first got to Baylor, and I've been more familiar with it all along. The second reason is that they are very similar in their appearance, in their interface, and in the functionality that they offer. So it's if you understand how to use Pivot, the Grant Forward interface will be pretty clear how to use that as well. So it shouldn't take a whole lot of re-explanation when we get to Grant Forward. One thing that's interesting is that I think Virginia mentioned that you can do the same search on those two databases and get different results. I know just here recently, I just did a few searches just to check and see what I got. And I did get different results on the two, and I got different numbers of results. Like I'd get hundreds on one and just a couple dozen on the other. And about all I can figure out is that that's probably related to the constraints that are happening on the searches kind of behind the scenes. And I'll talk more about that as we get to those. But just to tell you a little bit about Pivot, it's a database of grants, fellowships, other information. They catalog all the federal grants. They catalog a whole bunch of nonprofit state grants, private foundations, international sources and it's for everybody. It used to be called COS, which was Community of Science, which was a little bit off-putting to our arts and humanities faculty because it really did have a very robust arts, humanities, social sciences offerings. But now I think their branding is a little more consistent with the idea that it's for everybody, not just for folks who are in the sciences. So to get started with this, you want to go to pivot.proquest.com. We've got a link right here. Funding main is, I don't believe that you have to do that, but you go to the homepage, and I'm going to, at this point, switch over to the browser. So if you put a search in this search box right here on the homepage, that is a quick search, which will just search like a Google query. Before we get to that though, I want to show you how to create your account. So you'll hit this drop-down menu up here in the top right corner and either sign in or create an account. So after you hit create account, you're going to want to use your email address, create a password. We do not have it set up to use your institutional login, but you'll put in your information, you will consent to collection of your personal information, you will verify that you are not a robot, and then you will create your account. Since I already have an account, I'm going to sign in here. So once you have created your profile, you will see your name up here, and you will have some options under your name. So if you go to your profile, it will show you some information that is pulled from a website, if you have one at Baylor. The information that's there may be more or less robust and full, depending on how much information is on your website. The good news is that whatever information is there is not by any means set in stone. You can edit your profile and change any of the information that is here or add new information. You can see that I have just a few things here. I have my affiliation, my past affiliation, education, and one association I'm a member of, which honestly, it had been a while since I had been in Pivot. I had not started this new job the last time I looked at Pivot. And so they did pull this off of our website, which is good to know. So over here on the right-hand side, funding matches are listed. So 338 funding opportunities for your department. And so that is probably, since I don't have any publications listed or any research interests, they're pulling based on what other folks in the Office of the Vice Provost for Research have, I would imagine. Yes, Javier.
All of them are external funding institutions?
Correct.
Or are internal?
That's a good question. The question was, are the opportunities listed on Pivot all external funding, or are they internal funding as well? Pivot is only for external funding. The internal funding opportunities are listed on the OVPR website, but they are not indexed on Pivot. So you won't find those there. But you can see under my department funding matches, we've got 300 and some odd grants here. Since I am not actively doing research, I would be interested to look through these and see how they ended up with these. Your results may be better depending on what you've got on your website. As you go in and add more information to your Pivot profile, then that will make the results better. That will help you to get results that are more tuned to your needs. Now, this is a great starting place to look for grants, but this is not the ending point for your grant search, because this is just things that they find based on keywords that are there. You can also, of course, search for your own, you can also do your own funding searches. So when you end up back at the funding page, this field right here is for a basic quick search. So you would enter your search terms here and you do it just like a Google search. You can use Boolean functions like and, or you can put quotes around something to make it a specific phrase that you're searching for. But you can do just a quick search from here just by entering a couple of terms. So Javier, tell me a search term that you might use if you were looking for a grant about your research. All right, now I believe the default is that if you search for artificial intelligence, it's going to search for the words in your quick search separately. So since I imagine you are only interested in these two words together as a phrase, artificial intelligence, I will go ahead and put quotes around them. Otherwise, you're going to get any grant that has the word artificial or any grant that has the word intelligence, which is a much, much bigger swath of grants. So that's a pretty good search. Got 133 results. There's always a little bit of a signal to noise ratio problem when you do these searches, where you can do a search and get 200,000 results, or you can do a search and get 3 results. Neither of those are particularly helpful. So, 133 is a pretty manageable amount for a first search. You're, of course, not necessarily going to want to apply to all of these, but this at least, again, gives you a starting point. So once you have done a quick search, you have some options if you want to narrow down this list of results. Over here on the left-hand side, you can see some categories. Some of these are set by your institution. There is a So one of the ways that you can limit your search is based on if they require you to have a certain citizenship or not to be eligible to apply for the grant. By default, we have set it to either grants that require US citizenship or grants that do not restrict citizenship. And that's just because the vast majority of our users are going to be US citizens. And so grants that require you to be a citizen of some other place are not going to be relevant to a lot of our users. You can remove that if you are a citizen of a different place and you want to search for things that require other citizenship. You can click the X to remove that requirement, and that will broaden your results. But as you go down the left-hand side, you see that there are a lot of categories by which you can narrow your search down, and it shows you a number to the right of them. And that is, as you might guess, that is the number of grants that meet the category to the left. So for example, if you are interested in a collaboration opportunity, but not necessarily a fellowship or postdoctoral award. Actually, we're postdocs. Let's you are all postdocs rather. So let's look for just fellowships or postdoctoral awards. You click that, and it will show you just the 14 results that are fellowships or postdoctoral awards. You can continue to narrow it down even further by clicking, for example, on research project grants, which for some reason, oh, it's now showing you all the research grants and all the fellowships, not just the ones that are under fellowships, which is interesting. I would have thought that it would have limited it by both, but that's good to know. So you can also click the X to remove one of those if you want to go back, remove one of those requirements. You can also filter by funder types. So if you are only interested in private or nonprofit grants, you can look at those. I'm going to remove this so I see more over here on the left. If you're interested in just federal grants, you can click those. Same thing for applicant types and also for keywords. Now, the keywords section is an area that I think can be really helpful because these keywords are set by Pivot's team of editors based on what they see in the grants. And this can be helpful for one, because they may have thought of search terms that you may not have thought of. And so you may see a keyword over here that you wouldn't have thought of, but that is really important. And so you can use that when you're making future searches. The other reason I think these keyword searches are so powerful is that when you just type in a search term, artificial intelligence, of course, is going to appear in a whole lot of grants. That's not going to be a problem to find. But if you just type in a search term that is maybe a term of art in your field, that maybe your field calls it one thing, but a different field calls it another. If you put in one specific term of art, you might miss opportunities that are listed under a different term of art. And so the Pivot editors may have caught that other term and put it in the top keyword section, but you might not have thought of that keyword. So it can not only expand your thinking by showing you other things that they found that you might not have thought of, but it also can help you to find different search terms for the same thing that you were looking for initially. So all of these categories over here on the left are places where you can narrow down your search and really take your quick search and turn it into more of an advanced type search. So after you have done a quick search, you may think, well, this is okay, but I want to get a little more specific. So if you click on advanced search, this gives you the ability to do a little bit more of this filtering before you get to the results page. So for example, you might type artificial intelligence, and you can see you have some or joined fields. So you could type in, if there's a different term that you wanted to use instead of artificial intelligence, you can type in an or, and then of course that will have any opportunities that have either of those. You might want to join with and joiners, search terms. And you can also get more specific about where you are searching in the opportunity. So by default, you're going to search in all fields, but you could also, for example, if you are searching for grants from a specific organization, you might want to search by funder. And then you might type the name of a funder here in this box, and you could type a few of them if you wanted to search for several. You can add as many of these rows as you want, and you can, and so you can be more specific with your search that way. So Javier, since we're talking about your research, what is a sponsor that might be interested in funding your research?
NSF would be.
NSF, okay, so we'll type NSF right there. And so we're going to see results that have artificial intelligence in any field of the listing and where the funder field contains NSF. Is there another one just that we could put in here? NASA, okay, great. So this will show us any that meet this search term that the funder is NSF or NASA. Now over here, you can see there are a lot more selectors that you can use to limit the results that you get. So for example, let's say you are only looking for grants that are more than, I don't know, Javier, what's a reasonable amount of money that you might say, I don't want to mess with any grants that are less than 100,000. Okay. Okay. And we would also include grants where the amount is not specified, because a lot of the grants, they don't specify. You can also, if there's a particular time of year that you're interested in applying, you can enter selectors for the deadlines. Another helpful category that you can limit by is applicant or institution location. There are some grants, this is not as much a problem when you're looking for federal grants, but specifically when you're looking for nonprofit or foundation type grants, a lot of those are specific to one area. And so you might have a foundation that you read the solicitation and you think, oh, this grant is perfect for me. This is one I want to go for. And then you read and find out it's only for people who live in this particular region of the state of Georgia or something. Or it's only for institutions that are west of the Rocky Mountains. So you can go in here and add, for example, United States as a location. And then you can even get more specific. You can search for more locations. So you could search for Texas if you wanted to. You can also include sub-entities or super entities. And that means if I put Texas in here as a requirement, and there's a grant that says we require you to be in the United States, Pivot understands that Texas is part of the United States, so they will include that. Or the other direction, if there's a grant that says we want you to be located in Waco, Texas, they will assume that that Waco also means Texas, and so they'll show you those as well. I'm gonna take these off because I don't want, I'm gonna clear these, which you can click clear right there, because I don't want that to limit our searches too much. But because our institution is in the US, I will leave this one. Citizenship is when you do a quick search is set by default. It is not necessarily set when you do an advanced search like this. So if you want to select that, you can. You can also limit by keywords. Again, this can be a good way to find terms that you might not have thought of and to find terms that you know for sure are going to be in grants because they are put there by the editors because they appear in grants. I don't want to get too specific and have very, very few results, so I'm going to leave the rest of these, but you can see that there are other categories. There's also the opportunity to exclude opportunities. So just like you can say, I only want opportunities that meet these categories, you can also say these are criteria that I want to exclude grants. I'm not going to do any of those for right now, but just know that that functionality is available to you as well. So then you click search, you cross your fingers, and we get 11 results. Not bad. That's a very manageable search. Thank you very much, Javier, for your help with that. I've given this presentation before and gone through all this and then had 0 results, and that's embarrassing for everyone. That doesn't show people how useful this tool is. So you've got 11 results. You, like I said, that's a great number of results to have, but let's say, okay, I've got 11 results. This is definitely the search that I want to use. You can click Save Search and give that search a name. So I might call this artificial intelligence demonstration. And the checkbox says, would you like to receive a weekly email containing new or updated opportunities from this query? I will leave that checked and say yes. And now once a week, I receive an email from Pivot that will tell me any new or updated opportunities that meet that search term. So if the sponsor for this cyber physical systems grant from the NSF If the sponsor makes a change and Pivot's editors pick that up, then I'll get an email that says, then in my weekly email, it will say, this opportunity has been updated. Do you want to go take a look at it? And so that's a way that can help you stay on top of what's going on in your field. The great thing about this is that you can have as many of these saved searches as you want, and it will email you with new opportunities that match any of them. So maybe you run one of those searches that gets you 130 results and you think, oh, this is probably a little bit too broad. You can still save that search and get, show those results on your weekly emails, and maybe spend a couple of weeks reading the results and see, are these really things that are relevant to me or not? That can help you go in and further refine your search terms on your saved searches. And it can also maybe suggest new routes that you want to take, new terms that you want to search for. Note that you can also refine your search by clicking this refine search link. Once you have these results, that gives you the same types of options that we had before. It just brings you back into this search screen. So if you, for example, got 0 results or you got 100,000 results, you can make changes to get down to a more manageable level. So that is the advanced search, and that is setting alerts. So now let's look at profiles under Pivot. This can be helpful in a couple of different ways. You might be looking for a person with whom you can collaborate either here at Baylor or outside of the university. You might be looking for someone who you might want to work for at some point. You might, as you come toward the end of your postdoc time, you might be looking for opportunities for tenure track positions. You might want to get in touch with people who can help you by suggesting opportunities, or they might have openings in their labs. And so this can be a great way to find those folks as well. So you can see here, they have researcher profiles for Baylor University. You can, if you want to search by digging down into the College of Arts and Sciences, you can view profiles that are in the sciences. There we go. Then you can click, then you can drill down further and you could look into the Department of Mathematics, and you can see the 61 results that are there. You'll note that these are not all just faculty. There are also PhD students. There are also, I believe, postdocs probably in here somewhere. I just want to draw a line there. No worries. So this will show you profiles for other folks who are at Baylor. So if you want, for example, to look at Dr. Davis's profile, you just click their name, and it shows you their information that's on their profile. It also shows you funding opportunity matches for their profile. So if you, this can be a good way if you want to get in touch with someone, but you think, well, what am I going to talk to them about? You might look at this funding opportunities matches list, find some things that apply to their research interest that maybe you're also interested in, and that could give you a good foot in the door to call them or to email them and say, hey, I saw this opportunity that I'm interested in. I thought maybe you might want to collaborate on it. Let's talk. So that's a good way that you can do that. You can also search for profiles that are outside of your organization. So if you search for artificial intelligence, spell that artificial, that is not correct. All right, so you'll see that searching artificial intelligence, initially limited to Baylor University, gives you 23 results. There are also 37,000 folks at outside institutions who are working on some form of artificial intelligence. So that's a lot, obviously, but just like under the opportunity search, you have some ways to filter these results to get you closer to what you need. So you might, for example, say, I only want to look at folks who are in computer engineering. Well, that takes you down to 3,000 people. That's a bunch. So Javier, get ready to start making some phone calls. You've got work to do. You can also search by country where they are located. So 2,000 of those folks here in the United States. You can also even just search for institution names if you know that there are particular places where you want to look for people. So that's how you can search profiles to find others who are working in similar areas. So that is a very quick overview of Pivot and how you can use it to improve your research. At the end of this presentation, I have a slide that has a link to the Pivot homepage and also has a link to the Pivot YouTube channel. And their YouTube channel is really good. It shows they've got a lot of very short videos that do, frankly, probably a better job of explaining than I just did the different ways that you can use the search. So I recommend if you're coming back to this later and you have questions, I recommend you check out their YouTube channel. So let's look at Grant Forward. As I said, very similar in its functionality. You will find a lot that is similar. So once again, you will click sign up. You will create your account. You will dismiss this warning about the COVID-19 situation that continues to evolve. Enter your information. Again, under institution, you will just put, when you put your Baylor email address, it will autofill your account there, your institution there, I believe, and you will be able to create your account. Then you will log in. Here you will log in with your email address. So much like under Pivot, you're going to go under grants and search grant opportunities. They give you some suggested ways to enter search terms here. Let's search for artificial intelligence again. So they found 844 results just searching for that search term, which is a different number. Seems like we got over 1,000 searching on Pivot. I would imagine there are just different constraints on the searches on these two things. They're both going to be finding anything that's, big federal grants. Most of those things they're going to be finding, but it is a good idea to go ahead and search both just to see. Over here on the left, just like in Pivot, there are other categories that you can use to narrow your search. So you can type in a category name. You can search for a deadline that occurs during a particular time. You can also search for applicant type. So you can see it's a little bit different here than it is on Pivot. They don't tell you how many results each one of these things has, but you can limit by early career investigator. Note that you can also click the minus. So I don't want grants that are for undergraduates because I'm not an undergraduate. I also don't want grants that are for senior researchers, but I do want grants that are given to individuals or to organizations. And that will narrow down your results somewhat. You can then, if you are logged in, you can click this save search or alert, and it functions very much like the Pivot search. It lets you save this search and come back to it later, and also will give you regular alerts. Grant Forward gives you the option of doing your alerts monthly, weekly, or daily if you need to have your finger that much on the pulse of emerging grants in your field. Daily seems to me like it would be a little much, but if that's what you would like, feel free to go for it. So I've talked about saving a search. The advanced search is going to work, again, very similarly to Pivot. It gives you more search fields. So it'll search for all of these terms and then any of these. So anything you put in this box is going to be an or, and then you can exclude right here. So it's not quite as granular as the Pivot advanced search, but you can see that it still does have some of the same types of functionality. And so that will help you, again, to narrow your search down, exclude opportunities that you don't want, and then save and get alerts on that. So I know that I really flew through Grant Forward, and I know I flew through Pivot as well. At the end of all that, do you have any questions, either from Javier here in the room or from any of the folks on the chat? Any questions about things that you may have heard that I might not have explained as well? I am also going to, I will email out the links to the Pivot homepage and the YouTube channels for both. I'm also about to drop those into the chat so that everyone will have them. So the first link there is the homepage, obviously, and the second one is the YouTube grant. All right. Well, if there are no questions right away, then I will go ahead and end the presentation. Thank you all very much. Thank you all, Javier, for being here in the room. Thank you to everybody who joined us on Zoom. We are recording this presentation and we will have it available shortly on our YouTube channel for you to watch if there's anything that you'd like to review. We'll also have these links in the description of the YouTube video as well, so you can get to those that way. I see we have something in the chat. Oh, it's just thank you. You're welcome, CG. Thank you for coming. But yeah, if there are no other questions, then thank you all very much and have a great rest of your day. I'll leave the Zoom open for a few minutes if anybody thinks of a question, but you're welcome to go ahead and log off and go on having a great rest of your Wednesday. Thank you all for being here.